In this video lesson, we'll discuss the advent of the women's rights movement and utopian communities and how successful they were. At the beginning of the 19th century, it was still a man's world, both in America and in Europe, and a wife was supposed to immerse herself in her home and subordinate herself to her lord and master, who was her husband. Like black slaves, she could not vote and could be legally beaten, and when she married, she could not retain title to her property. Yet American women fared better than their European cousins. In France, rape was punished only lightly, whereas in America it was one of the few capital crimes. Women were still the submerged sex in America in the early part of the century, and in contrast to women in colonial times, many women now avoided marriage. Gender differences were strongly emphasized in 19th century America, largely because the market economy was separating women and men into sharply distinct economic roles. Women were thought to be physically and emotionally weak, but also artistic and refined, endowed with finely tuned moral sensibilities, and they were the keepers of society's conscience, with special responsibility to teach the young how to be good. Men were considered strong but crude, always in danger of slipping into some savage or beastly way of life, if not guided by the gentle hands of their loving ladies. The home was a woman's special sphere, the centerpiece of what was called the cult of domesticity. But some women felt that the glorified sanctuary of the home was in fact nothing more than a gilded cage. Clamorous female reformers began to gather strength as the century neared its halfway point. Most were broad-gauge battlers. While demanding rights for women, they joined in the reform movements of the age, fighting for temperance and the abolition of slavery. The women's rights movement was mothered by a few women, including Lucretia Mott, who was a sprightly Quaker, whose ire had been aroused when she and her fellow female delegates to the London Anti-Slavery Convention of 1840 were not formally recognized. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had insisted on leaving obey out of her marriage ceremony, shocked fellow feminists by going as far as to advocate suffrage for women. Quaker-reared Susan B. Anthony, a militant lecturer for women's rights, became such a conspicuous advocate of female rights that progressive women were called Susie B's. Other feminists challenged the men, such as Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female graduate of a medical college, precocious Margaret Fuller, who edited a transcendentalist journal called The Dial, and took part to bring unity and republican government to Italy. The talented Grimke sisters, Sarah and Angelina, championed anti-slavery. A woman named Lucy Stone regained her maiden name after marriage, and Amelia Bloomer revolted against current street-sweeping female attire by donning a semi-masculine short skirt with bloomers. Fighting feminists met at Seneca Falls, New York, in a memorable women's rights convention. The defiant Stanton read what was called a Declaration of Sentiment, in which the spirit of the Declaration of Independence declared that all men and women were created equal. One resolution formally demanded the ballot for females. Amid denunciation from press and pulpit, the Seneca Falls meeting launched the modern women's rights movement. In the decade before the Civil War, any white male over the age of 21 could vote. Women were gradually being admitted to colleges, and some states, beginning with Mississippi in 1839, were even permitting wives to keep their property after marriage. Bolstered by the utopian spirit of the age, various reformers set up more than 40 communities of cooperative, communistic, or communitarian nature, called utopias. Seeking human betterment, a wealthy and idealistic Scottish textile manufacturer named Robert Owen founded in 1825 a communal society of about 1,000 people at New Harmony, Indiana. However, little harmony prevailed in the colony. which attracted visionaries, radicals, theorists, scoundrels, and the colony ended up sinking into confusion and being largely unsuccessful. Brook Farm in Massachusetts was 100 acres, started in 1841, with the cooperation of about 20 intellectuals who were committed to the philosophy of transcendentalism. This venture too collapsed in debt after one of the buildings on the area burned. A more radical experiment was the Oneida community, founded in New York in 1848. It practiced free love, complex marriage, birth control, and the eugenic selection of parents to produce superior offspring. This enterprise flourished for about 30 years because they made superior steel traps and plates called Oneida silverware. You may actually have some in your home. I do. Various communistic experiments, mostly small in scale, had been attempted since Jamestown, but in competition with democratic free enterprise and free land, virtually all of them failed, or changed their methods. But the longest running Utopia Society was the Shakers. They were led by Mother Ann Lee, and they began in the 1770s to set up religious communities. The Shakers attained a membership of about 6,000 by 1840, but since their monastic customs prohibited both marriage and sexual relations, they were extinct by 1940. We'll talk more about the reform movements and utopias and the impact of the women's rights movement in class.